Welcome to A Call to Action, a series provided by Great Eastern Radio and the Brattleboro Community Television. We're covering many different topics from state shutdowns to our food supplies. We're talking with Alexander Ginsberg. He's a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop law firm. He's currently social distancing and sheltering at home in Virginia. And we're talking about understanding the SBA loans and how that factors in with the CARE Act that was brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I just read a quick like 3-page synopsis of the entire CARE Act and the SBA loans. You, as you earlier when we talked, said you've been kind of in the throes of this for a while. $50 billion in low interest loans, $350 billion in paycheck protection loans have been made available. Let's talk about how to start the process of taking advantage of these loans. I mean, you know, the landscape's changing all the time. So,
sure. So a couple of things. One is that the CARES Act empowers, or I should say, directs the administrator of the SBA to issue regulations within 15 days after the CARES Act passed. So by my math, that's by April 26, or sorry, by April, I don't know, second week in April.
okay.
And that's an astronomically fast turnaround for a government agency, especially the Small Business Administration, to issue regs. It can take weeks, months, even years for the Small Business Administration to issue regulations after Congress tells them to. So I think that for the next couple of weeks here, things are going to be extremely hectic for SBA, and a lot of the mechanics of the program or of the loans set forth in the act are going to be yet to be determined. And it's going to be a real curiosity how SBA is going to administer all these new loans, and whatever paperwork, whatever website needs to be set up to do this. You know, there is an existing website with existing paperwork for the loans that pre-existed this act. And those are, for example, the SBA disaster loans provided in one part of the Small Business Act. There is paperwork to apply for those. It's unclear whether the SBA is going to issue a new process and new paperwork for the new loans, or whether if you simply go to the website now, download the paperwork and begin to fill it out, they will sort of grandfather that paperwork into the new program. Unclear. And I think anybody who says they know for sure is probably not telling you the truth, because it's going to be a couple of weeks of a real free-for-all, I think. But having said all that, there is an existing program, like I said. If you go to the SBA website, it's fairly clear how to begin filling out paperwork. And if that's the same paperwork the SBA plans to use for all the new loans, then it is possible to get started right now.
So there was a website that I found on some of the documentation that your firm had sent through, disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's a fair, at the very least, I think a lot of the types of information currently required are going to be the same types of information that an applicant will need to provide. I do note that the new program, the program that creates these loans up to $10 million for small businesses, no longer requires a personal guarantee or collateral for the loans. So some of this paperwork might be waived.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, I mean, I think everybody, and it's hard because everybody's scared. Everybody doesn't know how this is going to unfold, where it's going to end, or when it will end, but it will end. It will unfold. So everybody just sort of has to be patient with the process, because as quickly as you're trying to figure out, you've got a federal government who's trying to figure it out for the 320 million people that live within our borders. So I think a little patience is what needs to be exercised here. It's fair to say that the money that is being put into place with the stimulus package and with the CARES Act is really just trying to kind of replace monies that have been lost due to COVID-19. Would you say that that's a fair takeaway?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. It's been the administration's position, and the drafters of the bill for the most part as well, that this is going to be a short-term but extremely acute national economic problem and national natural disaster. But the idea is, the implicit idea in the bill is that if we can just get businesses through basically a 1 month or 2 month period where we provide them the ability not to lay people off and keep the economy going, that we'll get through this and things will be all right by the end of June, basically. And that's what the act envisions. And that's also why there's this loan forgiveness program, which is a really important facet of the act. I mean, if you don't lay people off, if you're a company that doesn't lay people off, and you use the loan money to pay payroll expenses and other general business expenses for an 8-week period following the issuance of the loan, the government is saying that it will backstop that and forgive that 8-week period of expense. So the message to small business owners throughout the country is, don't lay off your workers for that 8-week period. You are covered.
Well, I mean, and that is one of the things I wanted to try to get to when we discussed today, because I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that, and that there is a little due diligence that you have to do in making sure that you are following through and with the regulations of the loan. But if you can do this for 8 weeks, then you do not need to pay this back, and hopefully by then we are all back out on the streets and doing the things that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So thank you for spelling that out. That's a really important piece of information. All right, let's get into some of the other things that the loan will cover.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I just addressed the forgiveness, the 8-week forgiveness period, and the same types of expenses that can be forgiven over that 8-week period apply to the loan generally. Payroll, because this is called the paycheck protection segment of the act. So the focus is on protecting, payroll, basically protecting people's salaries and benefits while this crisis is happening. But you can also use the loan money for basic business expenses like mortgage, rent, utilities, and your general ordinary course business expenses. And those are all allowable costs under the act.
So this is in, again, just to keep it in layman's terms, this is money that you would normally earn that you no longer can earn, but it is given to you to spend in order to keep your business doors open. I mean, obviously you're not going out and adding a new vehicle, I guess, well, unless it was necessary, but a new vehicle to your fleet. But this is to keep things status quo.
Yeah, I think the idea, again, is keep your doors open, keep your people in the office, keep their benefits substantially where they are right now. And for 2 months, those costs will be forgiven and backstopped by the federal government. So it's actually, if it sounds too good to be true, it almost is. I think that the problems in the act are going to be in the administration of the act. It's going to be, people are going to be clamoring for this. Maybe they already are. And I think that's going to end up being potentially sort of an Obamacare website fiasco. I can imagine this about to be happening here. I know that SBA's website was down for part of the day on maybe Thursday and Friday, so people were stressed about that. But I think the administration is going to be tough, and I think it's going to be tough, particularly where companies who really don't qualify as small businesses under the act are also applying. That's going to be a real administrative, and then down the road a different type of disaster. But in general, the terms of the loan program here are phenomenal, and really, if you use loan money to pay basic business expenses, there's a 2-month period that you can be forgiven for that entire cost.
I love that you keep emphasizing that, because that is the one thing that I have understood with the act, that I wanted somebody who was kind of on the ground floor of writing the documents and working through this. Tell us real quickly, what part did your law firm have to do with all of this?
Yeah, I think potentially there are a number of issues that lawyers who are sort of in the know about the operations of SBA and government functions generally, I think there's going to be a lot of use for those lawyers. And let me spell out a couple of things. I mean,
Yes.
one is, as a very basic matter, I think a lot of people have trouble with, financial paperwork and that sort of thing. So, lawyers can generally help with that. But I'm actually thinking of something more significant, which is an important aspect of the act is that it changes the definition of small business from what people who operate in the small business administration world have long understood to be what a small business is. And that's, generally speaking, you are a small business if under your primary industry code, they call it a NAICS code, you are small. And those NAICS codes have different revenue-based standards. They have different size standards. And some of them are quite small. I mean, some of these size standards are just a few $1 million, in annual revenue. But this act changes the definition of small business to say any business under 500 employees, which in some cases is actually a pretty big company. And it also says that if your primary NAICS code is a employee-based standard and it allows for more than 500 employees, up to 1,500 employees in some cases, you're also considered small. So all of a sudden, a bunch of fairly large or mid-sized companies at least are available or are eligible for a loan as a small business. And there's another important exception, but what the act does not do, I should say, there's an important exception to this, is it does not waive the SBA's affiliation rules except for hotels and restaurant chains. Okay. So the reason this is important is that, as everyone knows, a company and all of its and its parent company and all of its sister and brother companies, they can all operate basically as one unit, but they all might have different corporate forms. So we've got one LLC over here, one such and such incorporated over here, and they're all really owned by and controlled by the same person, people, or a company. And when I say affiliation rules aren't waived, what I mean is if you're trying to figure out how many employees one of these entities in this group of companies has, you have to total up all of the employees across all of the affiliates. It's not just one entity by itself. And that can get very tricky. And my suspicion is that a lot of companies that have, let's say 100 employees, they're not going to realize, actually, we're affiliated with these 5 other companies, and combined, we've got 1,000 employees, or certainly more than 500. They're going to end up applying, or each entity is going to end up applying for a loan. And I don't know if they're going to get the loan. Maybe they will. But then down the road, the SBA is going to say, the federal government was duped here. And,
right.
And we're coming after you guys for the full amount of all the loans times 3, which is what the False Claims Act, which is the government's favorite statute these days in enforcement defense. They're going to come after those companies for fraud. And so I think that's what's coming down the road. So in terms of what, one of the main services I think that, sort of attorneys in the know are going to be able to offer here is very good affiliation advice, telling companies when they really are eligible for these loans. Because it's very hard to tell. And I've worked in this field for a number of years, and I can say that the small business affiliation rules and their interpretation by the Small Business Administration are extremely difficult to discern.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done, a lot of confusion. So let's just speak to this for a second. My father always had a saying, when you're on the dole, you got to answer some questions sometimes. With that, and I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, when you're applying for these loans, is it like a typical bank loan where it falls under the same amount of scrutiny if you've been a business that has been kind of just a sort of a bootstrap kind of a business, and you've started and you've built from there, and now all of a sudden you find yourself in this thing where you've never is it more of a forgiving process as far as getting granted for these loans?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat that the SBA regulations and infrastructure still is forthcoming. With that caveat, so TBD exactly what the SBA is going to look for when it actually takes in applications or processes them. But on the face of the statute, the answer is these are not like commercial loans in the sense of their terms are every potential borrower's best daydream. There's no. Let me give you a summary of a few of the key provisions. Under these new loans, no collateral needs to be advanced to get the loan. No personal guarantee. In other words, if you fail to pay back the loan, the government's saying that nobody can come after your house or your bank accounts. And there's no recourse against individuals. So if a company fails to pay back the loan, they can't go after the owner, director, principal of that company as recourse. And all those terms would be very typical of a commercial loan.
Okay. One of the things that I did read within the act that it provides a $10,000 emergency advance. And that seems like that happens fairly quickly too. Once you have been, I guess, is it from the point you've been deemed eligible?
So the answer to that is no. But there's a nuance here, which is the $10,000 grant, which the government's basically presenting as free money in a way, because it doesn't have to be repaid, is actually available under a different part of the act related to the existing disaster loan program. Oh. And so what it says is if you apply for a grant under the existing disaster loan program, within 3 days, the government will advance that company or that individual $10,000. It does not need to be repaid. It's pretty incredible. But I will note that I think where companies are going to get tripped up, in addition to everything else I just said, is that they're going to end up applying for the disaster loan grant or disaster loan, which is different from these up to $10 million loans that we've been talking about. Two different things. The disaster loan program has different terms. The loan is only up to $2 million. There's not a forgiveness aspect of it, except for this $10,000 advance. And so what I suspect is sort of the intended operation of this is that very, very, very small companies that could really, in dire ways, need $10,000 right now are going to end up applying immediately under the disaster loan program. They can still actually simultaneously apply under the other program. But what they can't do is take both types of loans for the same types of expenses. Okay. So they can't be taking both types of loans to try to pay payroll expenses, for example. And I think, and I will say, I've studied this. The act is not 100% clear on exactly how a company is supposed to not duplicate the use of these two loans. But what I think SBA is going to say when it issues its regulations is that you can apply for both. You could even potentially be granted a loan under the disaster loan program, but the second you're awarded a loan under the new program, you've got to roll that other loan into the new program. And I'm curious to see how the SBA manages, those sorts of complications.
There's going to be a lot of unpacking to do, and it's going to have to happen fairly quickly. And once again, I think I spoke to this earlier, patience is really what's going to be the virtue here. Now, does within this act are like things like nonprofits included in that, like nonprofit organizations that employ people?
They are, yeah.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. Let's talk about because there are these many moving parts that you've laid out for us, and again, thank you for doing that. If somebody is watching this or listening to this in California or in New Hampshire, or Vermont, Maine, where you are in Virginia, where would you direct them for help to see if they're eligible, if they're applying correctly, if they're doing all the things that they need to do correctly? What's the best resource that you could advise?
I'm sorry, my technology.
That's all right.
I think that if we're talking about a individuals or extremely small businesses that don't really have doubts about being affiliated with other companies or whether they're eligible. It's just very clear to them that they're eligible because, again, the definition of eligibility, you could have a sole proprietorship and be eligible on the face of the statute. What I think they need to do as a practical matter is monitor the SBA website over the next 2 weeks and see exactly what it is that the SBA ultimately issues in terms of regulations or guidance on the application process, especially for individuals or very small businesses. I don't see a reason why they wouldn't quickly try to submit paperwork and take that $10,000 grant if SBA is willing to make that available immediately. I think Monday, tomorrow, will tell something. Maybe the next Monday we'll know even more as far as what SBA plans to do. But I think all any of us really can do is continue to monitor pretty closely and be prepared to submit paperwork as soon as we're convinced that it's the time to do that. And I think for these smaller businesses, it's sooner rather than later. You might as well get your paperwork in, particularly to take advantage of the $10,000. For companies that are bigger and may have some affiliation questions, I think a bit of a deep breath and a chance to consider some of these more complex issues would be appropriate. And I think it goes without saying, if any of those types of companies have questions, certainly reach out to me. But I think that's the best advice is that for some, depending on the circumstances, some individuals and small businesses probably shouldn't hesitate to move forward, and other companies should take a step back and just make sure this is the right thing. I mean, the Act does have loan and other provisions related to large businesses in a different section and title of the Act, and some companies, depending on their circumstances, may want to take a closer look at those rather than these SBA loans. Okay,
great. Alex, anything that we may have left out of this conversation that you feel is critical to get out there?
Actually, the main thing I wanted to get out there was that especially for really small businesses, that $10,000 immediate or pretty immediate grant seems like an incredible daydream, and I would encourage people to try to take advantage of that. And we obviously covered that, so that was going to be my main sort of practical advice. Is that's sitting there for people who have an immediate, urgent financial need, and to me, I mean that is the basic purpose of the Act, is to help legitimately small businesses with their dire financial circumstance right now. And so credit to Congress for making that available. But people should definitely seize the opportunity.
And just if I'm understanding it right, that $10,000, this is not something apply and you'll get in 2 or 3 weeks. This is something apply you'll get in 2 and 3 days.
That's right.
Am I correct in saying that?
That's what Congress is telling us, and I sure hope it's true.
I know sometimes when we talk about things happening inside the Beltway, I think the hardest thing we have that we do here is trying to tether ourselves to the fact that something inside our Beltway will move that quickly. But let's hope that it does.
I was amazed to see. I mean, not amazed under the circumstances, but I certainly have some doubts about what SBA is going to be able to issue in 15 days from the passage of the Act. I mean, I hope that the esteemed people at SBA are able to do something meaningful in that time period. It would be amazing. It would literally be amazing if they're able to meaningfully write and issue regulations in that time frame.
It really would.
Yeah.
Alex, thank you for taking time. For those of you listening later on in the week, Alex joined me early on a Sunday morning so that we could do this and we could all get back into our work week. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Thank you for the hard work you're doing with the SBA loans and the CARE Act. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I think this is great, and I hope people take a look at what's available about the Act and take advantage of it.
Great. Thank you again for being on A Call to Action.
All right.